Okay, you can start now.
Okay, thank you, Yasmina. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session on how to preserve sustainable tourism models worldwide. It's a pleasure to have such a diverse and experienced audience with us today as we dive into a topic that's not only relevant, but crucial to the future of our global tourism industry. Travel and tourism is one of the world's largest economic sectors, creating jobs, driving exports, and generating prosperity right across the world. Last year, the sector accounted for 9.1% of global GDP and supported 10% of the world's total employment. In addition to the direct and indirect economic benefits, tourism and travel also generates valuable spin-off benefits by providing infrastructure that other industries can use and by boosting trade, skills development, and investments. For example, in Paris, money raised from visitors is reinvested into tourism development, culture, parks, and recreation, and it pays for nearly 1/3 of public transportation costs in Amsterdam. The sector also plays a key role in preserving culture and protecting natural and heritage attractions. Today, the importance of sustainable tourism cannot be overstated, as the tourism industry faces increasing challenges in some destinations, with issues such as over-tourism, environmental degradation, and cultural commodification. The effects of climate change, biodiversity loss, and social inequalities have made it essential for tourism to evolve towards more sustainable models. We're also witnessing a growing demand among travelers for responsible and authentic experiences, as more people seek to engage with destinations in ways that respect local cultures and protect natural landscapes. Embracing sustainable tourism practices today is vital for ensuring that tourism continues to be a force for good. Although today the concept of sustainable tourism is widely recognized, it wasn't always the case. The Brundtland Report in 1987 and the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992 introduced the concept of sustainable development, which served as a turning point for the tourism and travel sector also. Then, during the 90s, the idea gained momentum when we saw the emergence of new concepts such as ecotourism, community-based tourism, responsible tourism, and nature-based tourism as more sustainable alternatives to mass tourism. This continues today with the latest wave of evolutions, including regenerative tourism and circularity in tourism. As travel and tourism continues to recover and evolve, we are faced with the ongoing challenge of balancing economic growth with protecting the destinations, cultures, and ecosystems that are the very foundation of the industry. Today's conversation will focus on how we can safeguard these models for the long term, how we can ensure that as tourism grows, it does so in a way that remains respectful to the planet, communities, and heritage. Our esteemed panelists today bring a wealth of knowledge from different corners of the globe and sectors within the tourism ecosystem. They are academics and practitioners of sustainable practices, and each of them has played a role in driving meaningful change in their respective fields. So let me briefly introduce you to each of them. Our first speaker today is Julius Arneger, who is the Professor of Tourism Management at West Coast University of Applied Sciences in Germany, and a member of the board of the German Institute for Tourism Research. He has held various teaching and research positions at universities in Germany, Austria, and Azerbaijan. And his academic interests are focused on the links between sustainable tourism, regional development, and biodiversity conservation, something which we both share in common. Our second speaker today is Barbara Schutt, who is a director and co-founder at Tierra Njani, Africa, and a responsible tourism advisor who's based in Nairobi, Kenya. She has over 20 years' experience in international development projects and is also an auditor for Travel Life and Green Destinations and the Pledge for Food Waste. Tierra Njani focuses on building capacity for tourism and travel businesses in Africa and beyond. And our final speaker today is Sadaf Khalid, an advisor on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and FPCCI Member Standing Committee of the Tourism Economy in Pakistan. She is also the CEO of the Walnut Heights Resort and also the WTTC Travel Agency in Pakistan. So we will finish up today our session with a round of questions for our panelists, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. So please feel free to engage through the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question during the Q&A segment. We'd be delighted to hear from everyone that's on the call today. So I guess we'll start now with our first speaker and panelist. So over to you, please, Julius. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here today and to talk a bit about sustainable tourism and the challenges and opportunities it brings for all kinds of actors in the industry, the consumers, the businesses, the policymakers, and destination management organizations. And the topic of this webinar is how to preserve sustainable tourism models worldwide. And I was asking myself when I thought about preparing a presentation on related to this topic. Maybe I think the question is should be the other way around. Like we shouldn't preserve sustainable tourism models. We should we shouldn't be afraid of preserving sustainable tourism models. Sustainable tourism models should be the norm. That should be the standard. So actually, it's the other tourism, the unsustainable tourism that that should be phased out. Yeah. So maybe we should switch our thinking that actually sustainable tourism is not some kind of separate from the other tourism. Actually, the challenge is to bring all kinds of tourism forms into this pathway toward sustainability. And so I would like to talk about this complex issue from the consumer perspective, with a focus on Germany, because that's where I'm based at. But hopefully there are many aspects that are valid in other markets and maybe also globally. And also what that means for businesses and destinations in the end, because obviously in tourism, that's all connected. So you already mentioned, Kara, some big challenges that are, the tourism is facing worldwide. I look at it from European perspective. So we have this big topic in the media of over-tourism nowadays. We have so this is a picture from a national park in Croatia, which is a pristine landscape, but at the same time, there are clearly too many tourists. So if anybody looks at some kind of pictures like this, I think we could all agree that this is probably a model that's not sustainable in the long run. We could also show pictures from European cities where locals are increasingly protesting against what they perceive as too much tourism. And especially the local voices have long been neglected, I think, in tourism development and tourism promotion. And this is changing, at least in some destinations, and probably increasingly in more and more. We have obviously challenges related to overuse and unsustainable use of natural resources. We could speak of golf courses in the desert. We could speak of construction of ski resorts where there is not enough snow, and other places where simply infrastructure is eating up too much of pristine and valuable biodiversity, from coastlines to mountain environments. Obviously, tourism is contributing to climate change. You mentioned tourism is responsible for about 10% of all of GDP worldwide. Roughly also that translates into jobs, but also into greenhouse gas emissions. So tourism also contributes to climate change. It's not the worst sector in this regard, obviously, but it's something that's not that we should not neglect. Yeah, and half of this these emissions go on the account of long-haul travel, especially air travel. And at the same time, tourism is also a victim of climate change. So this is a luxury resort island in the Maldives where I was working on a project for the UNWTO 2 years ago. And you can see that there are sandbags to protect the beach because the beach is being washed away due to sea level rise and shifting ocean currents, which are most likely linked to the anthropogenic impact or the anthropogenic enforcing of climate change, to which, as I've said, and as we all know, tourism is one of the contributors, if not, although it's not the only one. So in this environment, I think it's clear that we need to be more sustainable, as everybody who is involved in tourism, the whole industry needs to be more sustainable. There is no other pathway. The question is, what does it mean and how do we do it? And I think one of the biggest challenges in tourism as an industry is that the tourism product is really complex, and I think sometimes not even really that easy to grasp. I mean, when we look at what is actually the product that tourism is selling, in most cases, it's the destination experience, because tourists don't travel to Paris because the hotel is so nice. And they also don't travel to Paris because there's the Mona Lisa. So obviously that's part of the experience, but it's not everything. So the whole combination of different dimensions of destination experience has to be providing quality, and so that makes it so complex for individual actors to play their role in this big picture. So we have tourism enterprises, attractions, supporting industries, the destination management organization, if there is one. Many destinations don't have it, but there's still a destination experience, the public sector, and obviously the local residents. So I can have the best and the most sustainable hotel, but if the waste management and the wastewater management and biodiversity conservation locally is not working, then tourists will not have the feeling, and they would be right, that this destination provides sustainable tourist experiences. Or you could have like perfect attractions managed for tourists, but if the local residents feel left out and make their voices increasingly heard, especially in places where there is democratic possibilities to raise your voice, then tourists will notice this and will notice something's wrong. So not only in terms of sustainability, the destination experience is crucial, of course, but especially with regard to providing sustainable tourism experiences, all these kind of actors, all these kind of stakeholders have to work together. And very often, frankly speaking, they don't do it perfectly, because many of them are also competitors, and that makes it really, really challenging. So having said that, when we talk about sustainability, of course, I think we all know what it means. In theory, it means that we have environmental aspects, sociocultural aspects, economic dimension, and they all need to be somehow balanced. So I think this definition, and maybe this chart, or sometimes it's like 3 pillars, is pretty clear to everyone who is working in the sector. It's been defined, it's been around for years. So that's pretty clear. But then if you ask somebody, what does this actually mean in your concrete actions or in your concrete everyday operations, then you would have like many different answers depending on whom you're asking. If you ask a business owner, an entrepreneur, the answer of how to balance these 3 dimensions would be very different probably than if you ask somebody from an environmental NGO. If you ask a transnational corporation manager the answer would be different from somebody engaged in a local community-based initiative. So how to balance that is actually difficult, and there is no definite answer, but it's something that is, yeah, much easier said than done if you look at this need chart. And that probably leads to inconclusive global perspectives on the consumer side as well. So we always talk about sustainability. Nobody would question that this is a good thing, but what does it actually mean in my own personal daily life and the travel decisions I'm taking? The picture is not so clear. So there's this very nice Booking.com sustainability report, and I'm quoting from them. They asked their travelers worldwide in major tourist markets about their perception and attitudes towards sustainability. And 80% confirmed that somehow it's important to travel more sustainably. I think that's not surprising, but it's a nice result. So there seems to be potential in the market from the consumer side for sustainable products. 74% want more sustainable travel options. They want the businesses to offer more sustainable travel options. That's also an encouraging result. But also 49% say sustainable travel options are too expensive. So is this a contradiction? At least it's something that's, that deserves further attention. 44% say they don't know where to find more sustainable options. 39% say they don't trust that sustainable travel options labeled are truly more sustainable. And obviously, that's a problem. I mean, if you don't recognize how to make informed, or if you cannot make informed decisions, or if you feel like you cannot make informed decisions and you want to travel more sustainable, there's really a topic that needs to be addressed. Now, I want to focus a bit on the German perspective, and just to explain why I think that's a relevant perspective, although it's just one country and one source market, but it's quite an important source market for international tourism. So Germans travel roughly, we have about 1,000 international tourist departures per 1,000 inhabitants. In Germany, even a bit more. So on average, every German travels at least once per year abroad. Yeah, so that's quite high in international comparison if you compare to other countries. So Luxembourg, I think, is the most is at the front here, but obviously it's a very small and very rich country. The UAE also a bit above Germany, Saudi Arabia a bit below, United States way below. So yeah, I think Germany is still an important source market in terms of like how often people travel. So that's why I allow myself to focus a bit on the German consumers. Remember that 80% worldwide say we want to travel or travel sustainably. Traveling sustainably is important. This is reflected in the interest in sustainable travel in Germany, 56% in 2018, and that has gone up, as I will show in a bit. But if you look at how many actually purchases or choose providers, tour operators, or accommodation that is sustainably certified, this goes down to 6%. And if you look at how many actually paid for a CO2 compensation, for instance, for their flight, it's only 3%. So there seems to be a very big attitude behavior gap. If you ask people if it's important to travel more sustainably, they all say, most of them say yes. But if they then have to actually act accordingly, and if that costs even money, makes it more expensive, then very few do that. And the question is a bit, why is that? So if we look at the more updated numbers, then we see that all have gone up. The CO2 compensation even tripled in just a couple of years. but it's still like 9%. It's below, it's less than 1 out of 10 travelers that actually pays for a CO2 compensation. And I think it would be too easy to blame that on the consumer who talks about something but then does something else. I think the whole industry is to blame, or the whole industry needs to address that. Now, one problem is that, as I've said before, as the consumers also said, how do I recognize sustainable products? So can I actually trust a label that says something is sustainable? And the problem is, in tourism, that's very difficult. If you compare it to something else, like grocery shopping, yeah, if you go to any regular German supermarket and you want to buy bananas, you see that there are usually at least these 3 types on offer. One has no label, one has an EU or German organic label, and one has a fair trade label, which means environmentally friendly and at the same time also socially sustainable. And there's a clear price difference, so you can make a decision. Okay, this one costs a little bit more. Is it worth it for me to buy the better one or even the best one? Pretty easy. If you go on booking websites, many of them don't have any information about sustainability, and yeah, they focus on price and maybe comfort, but not on sustainability. And even if there's a sustainability kind of indication, then many people don't trust it. And the problem is we have too many of these labels. There are over 200 sustainability labels in tourism. And so the consumers don't know them. So I think it's not only the consumer's fault if they say, we are interested in sustainable travel, but then they don't travel sustainably. It's something that needs to be addressed. Again, the definition of sustainability is pretty neat. And I think there's also an issue here. We asked consumers in Germany, what is the most important one of these sustainability dimensions? And we asked that according to what GSTC, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, defines as core criteria for sustainability certificates. And maybe not surprisingly, the green ones are here the ones that are related to environment. Those are the most important ones. Biodiversity conservation, reducing pollution, but interestingly also having a sustainability management in place. That was also important for consumers, and I think that's something that's hardly communicated from businesses. Whereas on the other hand, if we split up the environmental dimension and we look specifically at this dimension of resource conservation, then only 3% said this is the most important one for them. But this is something that hotels always communicate, like reuse the towels, etc. Yeah, not cleaning, not changing bed sheets every day, etc. So this is all related to resource conservation, but apparently this is not the most important thing for the consumers, at least according to our survey. This is a representative survey for the German market. And so I think there's a communication problem here. Yeah, so we need to bring the businesses and the consumers closer together so that we are talking about the same thing. One other aspect is, of course, increasing political pressure. In the EU, we have the EU Green Claims Directive, which is a reaction to the fact that many environmental claims are actually vague or misleading or unfounded, and this leads to this confusion on the consumer side. And this directive should probably really change that. So in the future, you cannot claim that you have a sustainable product if you don't scientifically substantiate your claims. Like, okay, this is climate neutral, or this is 20% using less recycled or something like that. Yeah, and that applies to tourism as well. And it applies not only to EU businesses, but to all businesses that want to do business with these EU enterprises. So I think this political pressure will increase, and not only here in Europe, everywhere, because there's a necessity, and hopefully this will also clear up the confusion about standardizations, definitions, quality standards, etc. So some conclusions here. Sustainable tourism is not a niche market. It's also not optional for businesses. It's a necessity. If you're not sustainable now, then you really, really have to act. It's complicated because there's cooperation and standardization required to reduce this confusion for consumers and also for the companies themselves, and also to promote a consistent destination experience that fosters, that strengthens, and that communicates sustainability as a quality aspect. There are market trends, yeah. So the interest in sustainable traveling is clearly increasing. And at the same time, there's political pressure, and that will strengthen and accelerate this mainstreaming process that we need, going away from the niche market idea to really bringing sustainability into tourism across the board. And right now, I think this is a big opportunity for businesses because it's still a unique selling proposition. If you are sustainable, you can still really if you can really justify it, you can really position yourself in the market in a good position. But if you don't do it now, then you will be really left behind very, very soon. So I think it's time to act. I think there are many more opportunities than challenges. But of course, it requires cooperation. It requires efforts from the industry, and then I think we will manage this required transformation toward sustainable tourism. There are some good examples worldwide, where coherent action from all kinds of actors was really implemented in a consistent way. Costa Rica is an example. Turkey, for instance, decided that all in their new strategy that all accommodation have to be certified through a GSTC accredited certification body by 2030. So that's a really bold initiative. And then, of course, at the destination level, places like Venice that suffer from over-tourism, looking for innovative ideas how to manage that at the local level. So there are many places worldwide. There is no prime example where everything is done right. But it's good to look at what others are doing and how they implement certain initiatives and how they address certain challenges. And I think this also is important that destinations learn from each other and don't see each other only as competitors. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to be in contact after the webinar if there are any further questions or wish to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Julius. That was a very comprehensive presentation, and I think very useful for the audience. Definitely have touched on many of the points I think that for us that are working as practitioners in the tourism industry for a long time are dealing with currently, and we will touch on some of those. So I'm going to pass over now to our next speaker, Barbara Schott, and Barbara will take you through some of the evolution as well of sustainable tourism and the different categories. So thank you.
Just a moment, I was on mute. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and speaking to you today. I think Julius has covered already quite a distance here. I think what I would like to ask the organizers, if those presentations can be made available, I will also skip maybe a few of my slides, and basically so that we're not doubling up too much.
Sorry, Barbara, you're on mute. Can you unmute, please?
Oh, that's strange. Okay. Did you hear my introduction?
We heard about up until the point that you said you may skip some slides. So if you want to continue from there, thank you.
Fantastic. All right. So just to quickly go into it again, what is it really, what sustainable tourism is? And I think it's a buzzword, as Julius also said, you know, it's a buzzword we all have been hearing a lot, yeah. But what are we talking about? We're talking about making optimal use of environmental resources, yeah, which are a key element, obviously, in tourism development, yeah, and maintaining essential ecological processes and helping to conserve natural heritage and biodiversity. We've been talking about this a lot, and what I find really interesting is that this is very often what, if we talk about perspectives, what people associate sustainability with, yeah? It's about our environment. It's about waste. It's about resources, yeah? But we're not so much looking at, for example, the social cultural side, yeah? Do we respect authenticity of host communities? Yeah. Do we actually integrate them? Yeah. Do we conserve built and living cultural heritage and traditional values? And can we actually contribute to intercultural understanding and tolerance? Yeah. Which is part of the definition for sustainable tourism. And obviously, one of the big things, as tourism is quite often one of the key economic pillars in economies, is to have viable long-term operations that provide socioeconomic benefits to all stakeholders, that are fairly distributed, include stable employment, income earning opportunities, and social services to host communities, and in the best case, contribute to poverty alleviation. Yeah, so just in this definition, basically, we're already having a lot of things to dissect. Yeah, tourism is also part of the or is aiming to support the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, so for example, SDG 8, we're talking about decent work. We're talking about certification. Yeah, part of certification, for example, for Travel Life is your internal work relations. How are people paid? Do they have social security, etc., etc. Yeah, we're talking about responsible consumption and production. Yeah, just to give you here a little life cycle, what that means, from sustainable lifestyles to waste management, to sustainable resource management, cleaner production, resource efficiency, sustainable transport, etc. And life below water. Yeah, coastal and maritime tourism are tourism's biggest segments. Yeah, and I think especially in the Middle East, this is really a segment that is coming up now. So as the Secretary General said, sustainability must no longer be a niche part of tourism, but it should be the new form for every part of our sector. It's an opportunity to build back better and create an industry that is more resilient and aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He said that, I think in the post-COVID time, where we were talking a lot about reinvention, about destinations having an opportunity now, there was such a push towards sustainability during COVID. How do we build more resilience? How can we be more sustainable? Yeah, and destinations were talking about how they can reinvent themselves. So I agree with Julius in terms of there's a lot of opportunities to reestablish yourselves. Yeah. But now if we look at sustainable tourism, there's so many different models and forms, and honestly, I can't even cover them all. So let's just dive into a few ones. The triple bottom line model Julian was talking about. I think that is the one For all of us who work in tourism, the first thing that you learn is, and that you see, is that graph where we look at environmental, social, and economic pillars, and looking at, you know, how can we, where do we meet, and how can we be bearable, viable, and equitable in order to be sustainable. Yeah, so here we're talking about, again, minimizing ecological damage by reducing waste, pollution, and carbon footprints, while conserving biodiversity. We're talking about economic sustainability and social sustainability. Yeah. And again, there's so many different models, so many different definitions, yeah, which present us with the best case scenarios. But I think as Julius was looking at the consumer perspective, we also need to look at the industry. What does that actually mean for us? What does that mean in terms of implementation? Yeah, and I've seen that with many tour operators, for example, I've been working with. There's always that question. So what does that mean now? What should we be working on? What is something that is feasible for us as well? And do we now, if we go, for example, into a certification, do we have to do that right away, and all of it? Yeah. And that is obviously not a case. As my business partner, Angela Njihia, and I always say, it's a journey. And you start this journey with your first actions, and then you continue with your journey. And as many journeys, you know, it's got its ups and downs. Yeah. And the question is also, in which direction do you go? So let's have a look at ecotourism. Yeah. Ecotourism, again, focuses on responsible travel, mainly to natural areas, looks at conserving the environment and also improving the well-being of local people. Yeah. So in ecotourism, we often look at small-scale operations that reduce environmental impacts, at education for both tourists and locals, but also at contributing to conservation efforts and community development. Yeah. Now, if we're looking at types of ecotourism, that can be nature-based tourism, cultural adventure, and voluntourism. Yeah. So you see, there is, again, so many different sub-labels and opportunities or directions you can go into. For ecotourism right now, if we look at trends and opportunities, we're looking at technologies that can facilitate ecotourism, easier booking, easier sustainable transport, etc. We're looking at tourist preferences, so change in consumer behavior and the embracing of more sustainable travel and accommodation. But we're also looking, for example, at opportunities in terms of roles, the role of regulations and policies. For example, the EU policy now requiring more and validated data in terms of sustainable measures. I wanted to give you a very quick case study. This is in Ethiopia. Mulu Eco Lodge. Here we're talking about agritourism, for example. It was awarded the best tourism village in Ethiopia in 2022. It is in an agrarian community. We have benefits from tourism for 160 individuals directly and 1,500 individuals direct and indirect. Yeah. It promotes not only the agrarian products, but also supports education, skills development, innovation, and really supports sustainable land management, technology expansion, experience sharing, and education. So you see here, we have a certain set of natural resources that make the destination attractive, as well as cultural resources. Yeah, cultural resources go both from agricultural products, service products, festivals and cultural events, monuments, folklore, and art. So what does a place like this feature? Yeah, it's got its own marketing and social media campaigns. There is a minimum stay required for visitors, which is 3 nights. And that obviously has a lot to do with sustainability. The longer the people stay, the more the benefits for the local community. There's a very active effort to support cultural and learning exchanges. Yeah, it's very much focused on local resources and the supply chain. Right now, there's a road in progress, so it's easier accessible. The government has been supporting with a lot of training and uses it also as a best practice model. Emergency risk planning is in place, both formal and informal, and community policing is also one of the features of this destination. Yeah, and as you can see here, when we look at sustainable tourism, we're looking really at 2 sides. We look at the internal development and the external development. Yeah. So, and both of it is equally important. And I think that is often forgotten when you develop a destination or your attraction is to say, what is happening internally is, for example, income fairly distributed? Are people integrated? What are the benefits? What is the knowledge sharing? And then looking at the external development, how can we get there? Yeah. I'm gonna skip this one because Julius already put forward a couple of numbers. This is also booking.com in terms of the changes, how travelers view sustainable accommodation. I think it is quite interesting if you see these numbers from 2023, 2022 and 2015 compared to 2023. You see the trend, but you also see, the perspectives are there, but the implementation is the question. Regenerative tourism. Karak, you mentioned it shortly, is probably one of the very popular models we're looking at right now, because it really goes beyond sustainability, yeah? Because it says, what can we do to actually restore ecosystems and support communities? Yeah, not only to minimize harm, yeah, but also to leave the destination as a better place. Yeah, for example, we're looking at habitat reforestation, revitalizing local communities and cultural practices, and really engaging tourists to participate, yeah, in these kind of regenerative projects. Yeah, so you see the conventional green and sustainable axis here. Regenerative tourism, or the regenerative tourism model, is really looking at natural system design, at a much more holistic approach and a restorative and regenerative approach. This is basically just to give you another one. One of the keywords after COVID was resilient tourism. Yeah. So this is something that was developed by in Germany also by Masscontour, and it looks at how can we renew, rebuild, retain, and reinforce tourism. Yeah. So that we can be better in our competition, be prepared for future challenges, safeguard from exploitation, but also be resistant and resilient to threats. Yeah, so you can see there are so many different models that we can go to, and I think that causes confusion on all sides. Yeah, let me continue. More models. Community-based tourism. That is a topic in itself. I could talk hours about this. The circular economy model, where we're looking really specifically at how can accommodations, for example, be more circular? How can we as a as a tourism industry in our value chain, be more circular. Yeah, zero waste initiatives is one of the buzzwords right now. Low impact tourism model. Yeah, the responsible tourism model. Which is something, for example, what I like, because for me, I'd say, you know, as a business, I want to be a responsible business. And that will include all my sustainable goals. Going a little bit back and giving you an example for certification, the long run is a, let's say, very niche classification. That has been working, for example, here in Kenya, with very, very high profile destinations. Borana is one of them. And they use, for example, the 4C impact statement, yeah, where this basically organization has to prove what they're doing, yeah, and they have to basically give concrete details, what they have achieved and what the benefits are. Yeah, Chumba Island in Tanzania, Zanzibar, that was the first global ecosphere retreat that was certified by the Long Run. Yeah, so it's the first private marine park in the world. Yeah. There are so many things now I could basically go on about and tell you about, but I know time is running out. But just to give you an idea, they were very specific. They were looking at any construction of the bungalows was with local builders using natural materials. Yeah. Given open air, given you know, an experience where people are living you know, in the environment, yeah, whatever possible, being sourced locally and seasonally, obviously, looking at cooperatives like upcycling artists, then using environmental technology, yeah, so doing rainwater catchment, photovoltaic energy, composting toilets, and grey water filtration. There's so much you can do. And again, you know, let me just say, a lot of it is very much based on the natural components. I also have a few numbers here on the European market potential for nature and ecotourism. I'm not going to go too much into that because Julius already gave also some idea. But I think as these, hopefully these presentations will be shared with you, you can have another look. And if you have questions, I'm always happy to answer them. Yeah, but we do see there's a lot of potential for nature and ecotourism. Yeah, so there are a lot of opportunities. However, talking about the opportunities that arose out of COVID, what did come back was over-tourism. Yeah. And just to give you a citation, the tourism industry can no longer simply focus on how many tourists visit a destination or even how much money was spent in one destination as a measure of success. In fact, those measures are what led to some of the industry's most pressing issues, such as over-tourism. And I think we all have just an example now in Barcelona, demonstrations again against over-tourism. And we still tend to hear from a lot of governments and ministries, oh, we want to have 3 million, 5 million, 10 million tourists, yeah, as a measure of success for their tourism. And I really want to question that. Are we looking at quantity or are we looking at quality of tourism? So climate change is obviously a massive topic for the tourism sector. Yeah. What are the contributing factors? It's obviously transport emissions. Yeah. As we mentioned, air transport emissions are big issues, but we're also looking at accommodation and infrastructure, obviously, and tourism activities themselves. How does that impact us? The weather patterns change, yeah. We've seen it, extreme weather events, temperatures that are changing, and we're seeing that in every region. Africa is one of the most affected continents in terms of climate change, as always said. But we're looking towards the Middle East and we're seeing the impacts of climate change. And that basically also means we need to look at the impacts on tourism and what does that mean? How do we what do we do from here? Yeah, we're talking about rising sea levels, like now we're talking erosion and flooding. You know, we're seeing coastal areas that are being degraded because of rising sea levels, and that has a massive impact, obviously, on tourism. There's a big diversity loss and ecosystem degradation. The we're talking about coral bleaching, habitat loss, loss of species, and those are reports that we see are more than worrying. Water scarcity is a big issue. I think, what was it? In South Africa, we had a massive issue. In Brazil, we had limitations of water and ratios of water to be used per day. So, so it has a massive impact. And obviously, those kind of changes can also have an impact on seasonality, yeah, and tourism flows. Do we want to go when it's really, really hot, or do we go maybe in the season, or try to go in seasons where it's less hot, where there's less flooding, etc.? So what do we need to look at in terms of strategies? We're looking at mitigation and adaptation, yeah. In terms of mitigation, we need to reduce emissions, yeah? So here we're talking about, again, sustainable transport. We're seeing now that airlines are starting to make it more user-friendly, I'd say, to tick that I actually want to pay up for my carbon emission, yeah. But are we giving sufficient information? Yeah, I mean, I've had discussions with friends where I say, okay, if I can, I'll take a direct flight because the biggest emissions are starting and landing. So I'd rather pay a little bit more if I can than basically going via stopover, which will cost a lot less. Yeah, but that is a question of perception, of knowing, and also obviously of having the privilege that you can do that. We're looking at energy efficiency for accommodation. There's so much that can be done, and certification, for example, can be one of the channels. And I'm not talking about greenwashing right now. I think one of my colleagues will do that. But it is a way of sharing knowledge and of making providers aware what kind of ways they can go. We want to promote responsible travel. So how can we share eco-friendly travel practices? Yeah. As a hotel, as a tour operator, are we giving that information? Yeah. Are we offsetting our carbon? And we're obviously looking at restoration and support regeneration efforts on site. Yeah. So how can we support conservation of fragile ecosystems? Yeah. How can we integrate local communities better? Yeah. Are we looking at that when we choose our travel destination and our travel package? Yeah. And in terms of restoration, reforestation, wetland restorations are big topics. Yeah. Whereas I also say, you know, is it always the point of saying, oh, I'm a tourist, so let me plant a tree? If I don't have someone in the destination who's looking after that tree, maybe that is not the best idea and the best use of resources. Yeah, so we really need to look at the whole value chain from the consumer to really the implementation in the destination. And we're looking at adaptation, so resilience planning, yeah. Are we looking at zoning? Can we protect and conserve the more fragile ecosystems? Do we have zones, for example, where mass tourism is already in place so that we can also divert? Can we look at seasonality in terms of diverting tourism flows from the hotspots? Yeah. And in that regard, we're also looking at risk management planning. Do we have early warning systems in place, like in Indonesia after the tsunami? Are we restoring natural barriers, like, for example, in coastal areas? Yeah. Are we diversifying our tourism offer so that we do not have to only that we're not only having hotspots in specific areas, yeah, but can we divert that into the closer environment so that there's more benefit but also less impact, yeah. There's been a lot of talk about, for example, carbon taxation, and obviously laws and regulations need to play a role here on international, regional, national, and local level. And I just want to give a final example before finishing. And this is very current, yeah. So there is an initiative of the National Trust in the UK to twin with various destinations in Africa and the Middle East. And twinning basically is a lot about exchange and joint learning experiences. And these are just two examples, one from Petra, one from Egypt, where we're looking at youth engagement and education, yeah, which has led to a rollout of a first state recognized curricula combining themes of climate change and heritage in the Middle East region. Yeah, so we can see there is a lot of effort actually happening. And now we're not only talking about environment, we're talking about cultural heritage, we're talking about social heritage, and how to integrate, for example, youth and have a dialogue and bring that into that climate change debate. Yeah, and I think in terms of the twinning, also taking Egypt, yeah, youth do feel there is a responsibility to take care of their heritage, yeah. And it is something that I think especially younger generation really concerns a lot. And I think at the end of the day, I think the Prophet Muhammad emphasized already, yeah, the importance of taking care of the environment and preserving natural resources. And I think that was both in the Hadith and the Quran. So looking at environmental stewardship, so it is something that we talk about a lot, and it's a incredibly wide topic that we could only touch so far. But with that, I'd like to close my presentation and say thank you for your attention. And Kara, I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. That was very interesting presentation, some excellent case studies, I think. And I'm certain that the audience today will appreciate having an opportunity to study that in more detail as well. Some great facts and figures as well. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on now to our final speaker today. So Ms. Salaf Khalid is going to speak to us next from Pakistan. Thank you very much, Salaf.
Hi, thank you. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so must.
Sorry, so that if you just maybe go to full screen.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk on a very important topic. A lot of have been said by Barbara and Juliet, but it is very close to my heart as well, as I'll be talking about the same subject as we discussed earlier about the sustainable tourism models worldwide. And before I start my presentation, just a brief introduction from Asian's perspective, from where I am, Pakistan, and the whole Central Asian region in China and India and Bangladesh. Over-tourism is a big challenge for our countries these days, and especially in COVID. The impact on our economy and the environmental challenges have left serious problems. So I would be talking about exactly, a lot has been said, maybe I'll be repeating the same thing, but I'll touch upon why we all are talking about, first of all, the sustainable tourism and eco-friendly practices. We all know that the environmental challenges every year, whether it's floods, hurricanes, deforestation issues, waste management, we have similar problems in all across the globe. What can we do as private sector and help our governments minimize these impacts? I would rather focus on that. Of course, protecting our natural habitats, limiting the tourist numbers, where in a country like Pakistan, where I'll focus, the tourism industry is driven by the private sector. And the government's role is the implementation of these policies in our country. Since it's a raw tourism, it's being developed, the policies are there, but implementation is the biggest problem. We've already touched upon topic of community-based tourism, because the literacy rate in countries like Asia is low. So we need to educate the people that this over-tourism is impacting their communities here. And that is leading. Human intervention is the main thing which is leading to climatic challenges in countries like Pakistan. Cultural preservation is also very important, because in some focus areas where, if I talk about the northern areas in Pakistan, where K2 is the highest peak, and we get a lot of expeditions from all across the world, like Mount Everest, the base camps, it's becoming like a plastic jungle, I would say. The plastic pollution is so much, but what are we doing as a private sector? How are the tourists coming in and we're not preserving those environmental and those beautiful surroundings? Now, the most important thing, adopting responsible tourism policies. What I would request from UNWTO and our government, regulations are very important. Even if we do awareness campaigns, we need help from our governments to regulate the policies, to promote sustainability. It requires proper responsible construction in natural areas and protection of our wildlife, and also preservation of historical and cultural sites. Education. We need to also, there has to be a responsible behavior, which include minimizing waste and responsible local custom and protecting the environment. The most important thing I feel is the collaboration with the private sectors. Because as I said, in the whole world, not only in Asia, tourism is driven by the private sectors. We need to have collaboration, as the United Nations SDG Partnership for Goals also tell us, collaboration with the governments, NGOs to promote sustainable initiatives. And this collaboration can also lead for fund conservation efforts and ensure sustainable practices to adopt a larger scale. Incentive for sustainable businesses. As touched earlier by my fellow colleagues, offering tax breaks or grants to businesses that can adopt green practices that will encourage the industry to follow this example. Monitoring and evaluation is also very important. If we try to regularly monitor the environmental impact, which is impacting the tourism projects, we need to know the carbon footprint calculators, biodiversity assessments, and this needs technology innovation that will mitigate the negative impacts. As we touched earlier, sustainable certification programs is very important. In a country like Pakistan, we haven't even touched upon the ESG, environmental social governance, which is the new buzzword, and in a lot of countries, it's been implemented by the government. So we need to have the certification from the Sustainable Tourism Council that can set standards from the private sector for sustainable certification that will encourage the business to adopt these best practices. Sustainable conservation is very important when you're developing an infrastructure, whether it's resort or any eco-friendly destination. We need to prioritize the eco-friendly designs that will minimize the land disturbance, and it will promote the sustainable materials and also incorporate the renewable energy. Transport solutions, we need to have use of public transport, encourage cycling, walking paths in tourist areas to reduce traffic congestion and pollution. Now, for all this, we also need to have some kind of a strategy, which is, we call it long-term investment in conservation. Reinvesting in tourism revenues, we have to use the revenues that we get from the tourism, such as reforestation products, wildlife protection, and maintenance of these protected areas. We need to support the nonprofits, NGOs, which will focus on the conservation to support and protect also the endangered species, which are result of the over-tourism and it's impacting the tourism in those areas. We need to also focus on fair labor practices. We need to make sure that the workers in the tourism industries in the developing countries are fairly fair wages and work under good conditions. This will also help and encourage the local community with the long-term viability for the tourism sector. And mostly important, respect the local communities, because if we respect them, the cultural heritage, and we support their businesses, it will also start creating positive impact in the places where the tourists are visiting. We're not disturbing their natural cultural heritage because of over-tourism issues. I would like to give some examples how Norway, Sweden, and Denmark are practicing, because I was in this year in May, I visited Norway and Sweden, and I saw how they're progressing on eco-friendly practices and they're preserving cultural and natural heritage. I will conclude my presentation that United Nations SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark have set excellent examples by integrating eco-friendly infrastructure. They're having projects on renewable energies, local equipment involvement is a lot. They're practicing responsible tourism. Their focus is on preserving natural landscapes, cultural heritage, and promoting sustainable tourism models. So with that, I conclude, and I'll be happy to take questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadaf. Again, very comprehensive presentation. Thank you. I think it's very interesting today to have three very different presenters, and particularly to have your insights from the private sector also. So we've received a few questions, which I think, if it's okay, we're going to move on to those. And the questions I'll open up to everyone in terms of your own perspectives. They haven't been specifically sent to any one speaker today. So the first one is, what are the required changes that are needed to the economic structures in developing countries in order to implement an effective and sustainable tourism system? Who would like to address this question?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it? I didn't get the first part.
What are the required changes that are needed to the economic structures in developing countries in order to implement an effective, sustainable tourism system? It's a very big question. I can touch on this first. So I guess, having worked in government for a number of governments over the years, from a policy-making perspective, I think one of the greatest challenges that we have globally right now is for many years, the tourism sector wasn't understood. And many governments today still don't understand the value of tourism or how wide it touches both from the direct impacts and indirect impacts. How it's structured in terms of government agencies and departments, it's very fragmented. So we don't have necessarily dedicated integrated linkages across different departments. So I think policy making is critical in terms of the legislation and also setting up the agencies correctly. I think many governments that do have DMOs, they focus on marketing exclusively. They're destination marketing agencies. In my case, I worked with the Irish government for many years, and we had a different structure where we both developed and managed the destination and marketed it. So very much involved in everything from skills development to destination development, experience development, and management. And I think that's one of the takeaways for me, definitely in my own experience. I think the benefits that that brings, because it's very much community-based approach as well, engaging with local communities and ensuring that that there's consensus in terms of the way forward. But maybe that will be a segue for somebody else if they'd like to give examples from their own experience in terms of ideas that would help strengthen that, particularly for new and emerging destinations around the world.
I would like to comment on that because I worked at the policy reform group at the federal government in Pakistan. And even now with this new government coming in, we are trying to integrate new policies when it comes to especially climatic changes, because Pakistan, I didn't mention because I didn't want to take too much time in my presentation. We have been bearing a lot of flood situations from 2010. And now the governments have realized that the climate challenge is so huge that it is directly impacting the tourism sector, whether it's Pakistan or whether it's globally. So they have to come up with the policies at the federal level, integrated and legislated, pass it through parliaments. Then only corporate sector or private sector, as I said, as tourism is thrived by the private sector, they will take it seriously. When we talk about certification, if we don't regulate it by laws, if, for example, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm running my own resort and I have an own resort, which we have tried to make it eco-friendly by renewable energy and other stuff. But if the government is not pushing these policies, that's what the challenge I face internationally and a country like Pakistan is that they are not taking these issues seriously. And it is impacting not only the businesses, but the local communities over there. So this debate, I would yet to see. I've attended 2 COPs in Glasgow in COP26 and in Dubai. Now there's a COP coming in Azerbaijan and Baku. I wouldn't be going, but our government is participating over there. Let's see what are the outcomes, whether it'll be debating specifically on policies on sustainable tourism and the impact due to environmental challenges.
I think Barbara touched on something very important in the presentation also about KPIs. You know, the traditional norm for all destinations has been looking at increasing visitor numbers and increasing visitor spend. I think that's also another area from the measurement aspect today in terms of how we value and what success looks like. Maybe your experience, have you felt that governments are changing and tourism boards you're working with are changing in that respect?
Some do, some don't. I think it really depends. I mean, let me give you 3 very different examples, because it's also the question, what level are we talking about? Are we talking on country level? Are we talking on county or destination level? Yeah, because that's very, very different. I worked 6 years in Myanmar in the 2010s, right? And that was the time of the opening. And what was really interesting was that the legislation came in very, very early, yeah, So Myanmar, despite being probably a good 40 years back in terms of development, by 2013 had a responsible tourism strategy, then looked at community, community-led tourism, not community-based tourism strategy, mountain tourism development, etc., etc. And really had a more holistic approach at that time in terms of bringing the different actors together, not only the tourism ministry. And I think that is, for me, where I see an overarching issue, is because tourism is so fragmented, you actually need much more collaboration from the different ministries, as you mentioned, yeah. And that often with the relevant line ministry, that's not working. So until we have that, mind change, yeah, of really collaboration and working together, yeah, and that's the weird thing about it, because tourism is, like in Kenya here, is one of the key economic pillars, yeah. But how do you bring now all the different ministries and line ministries to actually work together and address this, the occurring issues in a much more holistic way? Very, very difficult, yeah. I saw we have some members from Ecotourism Kenya, yeah, one of the first ecotourism institutes in Africa, or the first, yeah, here in the audience, yeah. We did a white paper on the legislation, on the regulatory framework, and we found so many overlapping regulations and so on. So how do you deal with that? Yeah, because now you need to bring in all the different line ministries, departments, institutions, yeah. And the willingness to do that, yeah, is the question, yeah. Even having multi-stakeholder meetings where the ministry, for example, brings in and addresses exactly these kind of issues, brings in the tourism boards, the private sector, the associations, yeah, to jointly kind of have an exchange, yeah. These kind of dialogues I don't see a lot, and I think that is where the mindset for me needs to change. We really need to look at a key element of sustainability, which is collaboration and partnership, working together and see how we can actually, make the best out of it, yeah. And work much more holistically, but it's a whole change of mindset. And as we know, changing mindsets is the most difficult part. Okay, I'll stop here.
Very good. Thank you very much, Barbara. Maybe I can address this one to Dr. Julius, in terms of recommending a specific model to be applied in developing countries regarding sustainable tourism. I think all of the speakers today have recognized the triple bottom line model, but maybe in terms of that evolution, also, I guess, the progression now towards regenerative tourism and circularity in tourism. But are there anything that you're seeing maybe evolving from an academic point of view or from a research perspective? I know there is an evolution of the triple bottom line to quadruple bottom line currently. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think much has been said already, and I wouldn't want to add too much on that because it's all very valuable. I think maybe just one aspect from what I've seen in many places where I've worked, not only in developing countries or in the global south, is that I think this aspect of cooperation at the very local level is something that's almost across the board undervalued, which is natural because operators, businesses see each other as competitors first and foremost, and not as being jointly responsible for promoting a destination. And I think there's that's a lack of awareness, but it's not something that's restricted to developing countries or to the global south. And the second is, and maybe that's something that according to my experience, is often quite pronounced in some places, is we've talked a lot about the government, and of course, governmental structures are really, really important in order to promote tourism at a national level and also like on every level. And the government can be really a driving force for tourism or sustainable tourism, setting the framework and yeah, promoting it. But at the same time, I think I would encourage people that are active in the private sector not to wait for the government to act. I think sometimes there is this feeling that the government needs to kind of take the first step, and if they do that, if it does it, it's good. It doesn't always happen. So I think there's also on the business side sometimes kind of a lack of understanding what the consumers, especially the international consumers, actually want. And that's also quite understandable. But nowadays, there's a lot of ways to inform yourselves about global trends. We mentioned some of the reports that are out there, openly accessible. So I would encourage businesses not to wait for the government to change an economic model, but maybe even though it's a first small step, to see what you can do as an entrepreneur to kind of position yourself as a sustainable business.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, I think in the interest of time, we could continue having a much broader conversation on this. There's additional questions coming in, and I'd like to apologize that we can't touch on all of these today, but it has been a pleasure. On behalf of the ICCD, I would like to thank all of our speakers today for a very comprehensive and very interesting conversation on this very broad subject. And I think the presentations will be made available afterwards for those who have joined us. And on behalf of myself also, Cara, I would like to thank everybody for their time today, for joining us. So have a lovely afternoon, and hopefully we can continue this conversation on another date as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.